Hello again, Pastor Mark from the Word of Life Fellowship Church with another Wednesday short, quick Bible study. Today we're going to dive right in and we're going to look at a couple of passages from 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and chapter 10. We're going to reference several verses from Acts chapter 15. I'll start with that one. In Acts chapter 15, verses, I think is 22 to 29, something like that, or 23 to 29. It is a copy of a letter that was written to the churches in Cilicia and several places in the ancient world, specifically to address whether or not the Gentile believers who were being added to the church at a rapid rate, if they should follow the law of Moses. And the apostles, after having like we would call it a conference or some kind of a conference where they all got together and were deciding these questions that were urgent, and they were urgent, and they were serious in the time. After praying and probably many days, and each one weighing in, they decided that the Holy Spirit was leading them to say, no, the Gentiles don't have to follow the law of Moses, but there were 4 things that they should adhere to. Now, I've talked about this before, and we've had some Bible studies about it in the past. And let me apologize right now, this glare on my glasses. I'm not going to be able to get rid of it. There are windows in the room where I am, and I can't avoid that. I'm going to try. I'm seeing it in the reflection on the camera, and it's distracting me, so I hope it's not too distracting to you. So today we're going to look at mainly just one of those things, but specifically we're going to look and see how the Apostle Paul addresses the subject in 1 Corinthians. Now in the letter, he was the pastor, James, from the church in Jerusalem, which is the Lord's brother, James, not James the Apostle, who was beheaded shortly after the church was born. Not that James. When you read the book of James, that was written by the Lord's, his half-brother, one of Mary's other children. Now that's going to freak some of you out. Get your Bible out, read through it, you'll find out. The Lord had sisters and brothers. We really only know, as far as in the Bible, 2 names of 2 of his brothers. One is Jude. The book of Jude was written by the Lord's brother. And the book of James. James happened to also be the pastor of the church in Jerusalem. James is writing this letter. And in this letter, he tells them that they, meaning the headquarters, I'm going to use the word headquarters, the headquarters of the church did not send anyone to the Gentile churches throughout, we would call it the Mediterranean region, telling them they have to adhere to the law of Moses. He said, no, we didn't do that. It did not come from us. And he says, we're sending Paul and Barnabas, and there's 2 other guys, Judas and Silas, along with other men, to take copies of this letter to the churches in the region there and explain to them that there are 4 specific things that they should abstain from and adhere to and follow these directions. And that is, first is abstain from things offered to idols. Abstain, don't eat blood. Don't eat anything that's been strangled, and abstain from sexual immorality. Today, we're going to look at how Paul addresses the question, things offered to idols, and how he does so with the Corinthian church, which they were not named in this original part here. This came later. Paul goes to Corinth after this. And so I believe, and well, at least with this message in this letter. So, Paul, 1 Corinthians chapter 8, the 4th verse, I'm reading from the New International Version today, says, "So then, about eating food sacrificed to idols. We know that an idol is nothing at all in the world, and that there is no God but one." So he opens the subject by saying, concerning things offered, eating foods offered to idols, because that is the first of the 4 expressed in the letter. Abstain from things offered to idols. The King James Version says pollutions of idols. This is what it means. Don't eat things offered to idols. But Pastor Mark, I'm not going to eat anything offered to an idol. I live in America. I live in Canada. I live in Europe. We don't do that. Well, I have news for you. There are restaurants in your community, very likely, that are owned and run by people that are not from this country, not from your country, and they are idol worshipers, and they have idols sometimes in their restaurants. Now, if before the restaurant opens, they do a little ceremony of waving things before their idol god, and then cook it up and eat it, and if you know about it, as a Christian, you should not eat it. This command from Acts chapter 15 has not been rescinded. This applies to us today. Don't eat blood. Don't eat anything that's been strangled, and absolutely abstain from sexual immorality. But Pastor Mark, that's old-timey. That was 2,000 years ago nearly, and it's relevant, folks. The place where I work, we sell idols for Buddha and other Hindu idols. Yeah, they're being sold in the store that I work in, and people come in there and buy them. And I've been in restaurants. I walked in the door of a restaurant, and there was this. It was a Hindu god. I recognized it because I've been to India, and there was incense on the little incense sticks burning to it. So I know that somebody had said some prayers and was burning incense to their idol god. And I stood there and I thought, I wonder if they've offered anything here, and we're going to address that question in a moment. So moving forward, Paul says, we know that an idol is nothing, and there's only one God. And so it's beginning to skip down to verse 7. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 7. And he says, but not everyone possesses this knowledge. Some people are still, again from the New International Version, some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat sacrificial food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to a god, lowercase g. And since their conscience is weak, meaning they're new in the Lord, they're not a well-rooted Christian, it is defiled, meaning it would be sinful. And then he clarifies with verse 8, but food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and we're no better if we do. So he's saying, I get it. The food itself is not necessarily what is sinful or not. And he says, verse 9, be careful, however, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. Verse 10, for if someone with a weak conscience sees you with all your knowledge eating in an idol's temple, won't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to idols? So this weak brother or sister for whom Christ died is destroyed by your knowledge. Let that sink in for a second. Paul is saying a Christian who understands that that idol is nothing, and he goes ahead and he's eating in the idol's temple, which they would apparently serve meals and things there, and you could go there and eat the food. But a new Christian sees it, and they don't understand, and they participate, thinking it's part of the worship to an idol, and now it's sin to them. Look at verse 12. When you sin against them in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Wow. Then Paul makes a statement. He says, therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I will not cause them to fall. That's the last verse in chapter 8 of 1 Corinthians. This is not the end of his discussion on it, however. In chapter 10, beginning with the 19th verse, he picks it up again and concludes his statement, because the in-between he addresses a few other things. Verse 19, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, do I mean then that food sacrificed to an idol is anything, or that an idol is anything? No, but the sacrifices of pagans are offered to demons. That's what the New International Version says. Devils, I believe, is what the King James says. And they are not offered to God. So these sacrifices that the idol worshippers are making, they're offering them to their idols, which Paul is explaining to us and clarifying. It's actually devils. They're not God. It's false gods, and they're not just a statue. They represent some devil. And he says, and I do not want you to be participants with demons. And then he explains, and he goes and he refers to the Lord, what we would call communion or Holy Communion, where we eat the bread and we drink the wine or the juice, whichever it is that you do. And the wine symbolizes the blood of Christ, and the bread symbolizes his body, which was broken for us, and his blood that was sacrificed for us. And he refers to that, and he says, you cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons too. You cannot have part in both the Lord's table and the table of demons. He is linking taking communion, that's what we call it, with eating food offered to an idol. Whoa, let's follow the thought. Follow his thought. Verse 25. Verse 25. Eating anything sold in the meat market he says, eat anything sold in the meat market without raising questions of conscience. For the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. I'm just reading several verses here. I am referring to the other person's conscience, not yours, he says. So that's verse 28. Verse 30. If I take part in the meal with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of something I thank God for? So back to verse 25. Eat anything sold in the meat market without raising questions of conscience. In other words, he's saying, if you buy the food in the market, he says, don't ask where it came from. That's what without raising questions of conscience means. Don't ask. Now, the other side of that, we can infer, if you ask and they say this was offered to, I'm just going to make up something offered to Zeus, well, then you better not be eating it, because that's something offered to an idol. Does that make sense? So, Paul, I find this interesting how he addressed the question to the Corinthian church in this letter. Now, this is long after James has sent this letter to the churches in Antioch and Cilicia and then the regions thereabout. And Paul covers it, but he spreads it out over a couple of chapters. But he says if the Christian who understands that's just an idol and it doesn't mean anything, it's made by somebody's hands, it is not God, it doesn't represent God, and they're feasting in the with the idol worshippers, and their conscience is not bothering them because they know that it's not a God, but a new convert sees it and participates. They sin, and this person sinned against Christ. So you both sinned. Even if you had the understanding that it's just nothing. So what is the short version of this? Abstain from things offered to idols. But Pastor Mark, I know you're going to say that we don't have idols in this country. We do. And more every year. As more people move here from other countries and they bring their religion with them, it spreads around. There's a woman that I work with that has forsaken the Christian faith, and she now worships an idol. And she tells people with confidence, "Oh, I'm a pagan." And she names this idol god that she worships and prays to. She doesn't celebrate Christmas anymore, Easter, any of that stuff. Now she has family members that do, and she's polite and she's kind, and she's not rude about it. But there are people in your midst that worship idols. And don't consume anything that was offered to an idol. We're not supposed to do that. I recognize that it isn't anything, it's made by somebody, and Paul recognized that as well. But then he went on to say, if you do so and it causes someone else to sin, you have sinned against Christ. I'm not going to do that. This is a very interesting Bible study, maybe not something that drives you to your knees to call out to God, I'm sorry, Lord, I missed the point, I missed the mark. That's not necessarily the purpose of really most Bible studies. But in this context, if you have been knowingly eating something that was offered to an idol, you need to stop. Read Acts chapter 15, read that letter, read these chapters, chapter 8. Go ahead and read chapter 8, 9, and 10 of 1 Corinthians. Read them in succession. If you can, read them all at the same time. And you'll get a new kind of context of the topic. Well, God bless you. I hope you have a great evening. Hope that this has been a blessing to you today. We'd love to see you Sunday morning, 10:30 at the True by Hilton, 72nd and Haskell. There's a lot of construction going on at 72nd and Grover, and it's getting more difficult to see the hotel behind all the new buildings, but that's where we are for now. The big conference room on the main floor. God bless you. Have a great evening.